For the longest time, we've been talking about this notion that the path of least resistance has been to the upside for the markets. Is that still the case right now?
Well, certainly from a technical perspective, if you look at the major indices, they really face no resistance. That means that they don't have previous peaks to contend with on their charts. And really the only one left is the Russell 2000 index that still contends with a hurdle on its chart. And that has seen momentum improve and also relative strength improve as market breadth or participation has improved. So I do think that we'll see the Russell 2000 index follow the other major indices to new highs. Maybe it doesn't happen this week or next week, but sometime soon. And that's going to be associated with additional expansion in market breadth. And that's the stuff that can really fuel an uptrend. It's obviously a mature uptrend by a lot of measures, but the momentum is still there from an intermediate and long-term perspective.
Now, you mentioned the small caps. Certainly one place a lot of traders have been looking towards for some kind of signal or confirmation about record highs maybe in the offing again. Another place people are watching, Katie, I know, is the transportation stocks. And those ones have been lagging pretty markedly so over the shorter to medium term. Is there any concern on your end about whether or not those transportation stocks are in any way indicative of the future direction of the overall market?
You know, I don't use the transports in that way as sort of a barometer. Obviously, the airlines are under pressure for good reason. Now, when we look at those benchmarks like JETS, which is an ETF representing airlines, we see oversold readings and also support nearby. So the worst may be over there, and we're looking at it more from a contrarian perspective and not as something that's bearish for the broader market or for the economy necessarily. Rather, we try to be mindful of these oversold conditions, and we try to act on them when we do see the momentum uptick or sort of improve off of those lows. We haven't really seen that on a broad basis yet, but we are seeing it in the broader sort of cyclical arena. So we have seen some signs of life in relative strength terms and also from a momentum perspective in the likes of industrials more broadly, also in basic materials. We are even upgrading financials from a relative strength perspective because their phase of underperformance has now generated that oversold reading near support.
So, if you go back towards the pandemic lows of last year, many of those sectors that you've mentioned have been the leadership, and we understand that. They're the ones that were the hardest hit during the economic downturn, and they're the ones that are recovering the strongest. Is there any perhaps caution out there to this notion that over the past month we've seen the best performance out of places like utilities on a relative basis and real estate as well? It kind of takes away some of that luster from the industrials trade that you were just mentioning. Is the fact that utilities are doing well, is that something we should worry about?
You know, the utilities are doing well. They had a pretty strong July, considering it was such a strong July. You typically would expect more, I guess, defensive action out of the likes of the utilities. And yet, if you look at the long-term relative strength trend there, it's very much to the downside. In fact, the ratio of something like the S&P 500 Utilities Index to the S&P 500 itself is very close to its lows. So that relative strength is not that great or very promising for utilities from an intermediate term perspective. And yet you can make a case for some of those stocks in absolute terms. They certainly have support. The XLU as one benchmark has held up right near its 200-day moving average, which is turning to the upside. So you can make a case for them, certainly, but I don't think it's another barometer or anything to be bearish about.
Katie, as you're looking at your overall coverage universe, are there, I know that you look at setups, right? Bullish setups or bearish setups, things that you think could break out. Are there any companies in particular that have caught your attention that may be poised for that kind of upside move in the coming weeks?
You know, there are a lot of breakouts from a bottom-up perspective. We do reviews of the S&P 500, really looking at the stocks one by one. And we're certainly through this earnings season seeing more breakouts and breakdowns. One that's very mainstream that I could highlight to you would be Tesla. Tesla is one that has pushed out of a consolidation phase, and that follows an intermediate term turnaround within its longer term uptrend. So that would be one good example of a breakout, but there's really a lot of those out there.